Timberborn is a city builder game where you get to build your own beaver town. You need to take care of your beavers by providing them food, water, shelter, but more importantly, protect them from deadly droughts that occur from time to time. This is where the theme shines, as to combat these droughts you have to tame the beast that is water. To tame this beast you have to build and design a network of waterways, dams and floodgates so that your beavers don't die when the next drought arrives. And that is basically it. It's a very simple yet solid premise for a city builder that has a very unique theme. I mean, we have seen odd city builders before, but building a city with beavers? Now that was new for me, but that is exactly what pulled me into this game. Getting started in Timberborn is really simple, however it will throw you in the deep rather quickly afterwards. After you pick the faction and the map, you are set to start building your beaver city. There is a tutorial that does a good job explaining the basics, but just only the bare basics. Once the short tutorial ends, you are all on your own to figure everything else out, which is something I really like in these kind of games. Though this is also the reason why my first playthrough in these kind of games always ended a bit of a disaster, but that is how it should be if you ask me. It's learning by failing, and especially in Timberborn I learned more from my mistakes than I could from any tutorial. Every playthrough starts the same way. You have a single building and some beavers, and from there you need to start building things so that your beavers can sustain themselves. This is done by making houses, creating farms, and of course collecting wood. Water plays a huge role for beavers as well, as that is the key element to survive the periodic droughts. So it won't take long before you start building dams and plan out ways to collect water. There's always one or two water sources on the map, and land around them is fertile and useful for growing food and trees. The rest of the land, however, is completely barren, so if you want to expand your city, you not only got to find a way to store water, but also a way to spread water effectively across the land. Of course, the further your city is developed, the easier this is, and the more you play, the better you get at planning these things out. And that is everything you will do in Timberborn. Start off with nothing, build up a beaver city, and then keep on expanding further and further. While you are expanding, it is of course your job to take care of your beavers and be sure that they survive, which at times felt a little bit shallow. As long as you provide food and water, your beavers are happy and do whatever you tell them to do. They do have more needs beside food and water, but those are all optional. Yet despite that, I always felt compelled to try and fulfill these needs, because they are actually fun to fulfill and give a nice spin to your experience. These beavers like to have a social life, seek spirituality, want fancy food, or want to be wowed by a big impressive structure, or just want a relaxing ride on a carousel. What made fulfilling these needs the most fun were the buildings themselves, as they were unique and stood out in your city. But what was also really nice was that you didn't constantly have to focus on all these needs at the same time. It's rare to see a city builder where you decide the progress curve. It's your choice if you give your beavers bread or a carousel. They will be more happy with those, but are also happy without them. But because their needs were mostly optional, the game felt very shallow at times. But in return, it did feel really relaxing, and I didn't feel like I had to constantly quickly adapt to new needs because I reached a certain point in my playthrough. Things would be fulfilled once I thought I and my city were ready for it. Though despite my personal positive outlook on this, I can understand if some people don't like this. If you are someone that really wants to be driven and focus on these needs to fulfill them, you will find barely any reward in doing so. And if you are someone that just care for the minimum and nothing else, then you have not much to do in the game in terms of management, collecting resources and fulfilling needs as well. The game does have somewhat of an industrial building element where you have to create a power network and manage power generation and consumption by certain buildings, but it's not Factorio. Here it's also kept very simple. While you have multiple different buildings that can generate energy, you can all connect them to one single network. And buildings that require energy can all be connected to one another, saving you a lot of trouble with the power networking itself. So even where Timberborn goes into a bit of depth, it still kept it very simple and easy to use. And I think this overall simplicity that the game has is done on purpose so that the main focus can go to the element that is rather unique, but more importantly complements the beaver theme. This is of course playing or mostly fooling around with water and trying to control it. The lands your beavers try to inhabit are not ideal. In fact, they are barren wastelands with periodical devastating droughts. Water, as stated before, is therefore the key element for survival. Your beavers can pump the water and store it, but of course in the long term this will not be enough. You have to learn how to terraform the land around you to transport and store water passively from your main water source. To me, this is the element that was the most fun in the game. It's a constant push and pull for preparing for the next drought. At the start these droughts take a day or two, but late game can easily reach 8 to 10 days straight. These droughts can be devastating to your beavers and even completely destroy your town if you are not prepared for them. Now you can follow the tutorial and store water in barrels or large tanks, however I opted for the more unconventional way. Instead of storing the water on land, I let land be flooded or created small basins and channels that could store water passively so that I didn't need to rely on stored water alone. Of course this approach worked differently in every situation, especially elevated situations. There I created enclosed water loops to ensure my farms would have water during droughts while at the same time not waste water. Of course mistakes will be made when you opt for such an approach. You might flood your whole town by accident or build such a good storage space that the river completely dries up. This is what I really liked of playing around with the water and what makes everyone's experience unique, as everyone has their own ideas and plans to control the water. And once you created a waterway construct that actually works the way you planned, it feels really rewarding as it makes surviving the next drought a lot easier for you and your beavers. Though it was also funny to see how a plan could explode in your face and you having to recollect yourself from it. And it are these moments where I'm glad that the rest of the game's mechanics are fairly simple and even optional. I felt barely to no pressure to succeed at anything first try when building my waterways or dams. Yes, failure would make things difficult, especially when you accidentally drain all your water right before a drought. But a mistake like this is not relenting and unforgiving to the point that it automatically means a game over. The role and way water worked in Timberborn was a lot of fun and really interesting. It's a changing element that affects your every choice, yet it doesn't screw you over at every wrong turn you could make. Of course it could on the highest difficulty, as lengths of droughts are mostly determined by the difficulty setting. But even on normal, droughts can be a challenge when you're still learning the ropes of the game. But still, making mistakes felt less punishing and in one way or another always rewarding. A big surprise for me was that Timberborn has another trick up its sleeve to spice up the gameplay a little bit after you learned and got comfortable with the basics. There are 2 factions in the game and one of them is locked at the start. Once you played enough with the first faction and reached a certain satisfactory rank with them, you unlock the other one, which turns the game a little bit upside down as they have access to a lot of different buildings. The beaver faction that's unlocked at the start, or in other words the default faction, has access to wind turbines for energy, beehives to make crop grow faster, and those beavers need a social life to reproduce. The second faction, the one that you will unlock later down the line, doesn't have those kind of buildings or needs. They have a steam engine instead and don't need a social life to reproduce, as they reproduce through cloning tubes. And their differences don't end there, as basic buildings also work differently and even come in different shapes. Timberborn supports you building vertically, and the second faction support is even more, as almost all their buildings are stackable. The changes this second faction brings to the game is really great, as it requires you to change and adapt your approach to the basics, yet still stays close enough to the basics that you don't need to learn complete new things. So far, Timberborn sounds like a very solid game, and to a certain extent it is. However, despite that, it is still an early access game, which means there are some problems and room for improvement. One of my first problems with the game was the district system. Your beaver city works with a district system which is connected to one building. Districts have a certain range, a limit in which your beavers will walk and build. So to expand your city, you need to create multiple districts, set up a road network, and if needed, trading routes. Now, I love the idea of the districts, as every district gets their own character as you develop them. However, the range of a district is not as easily understood. The game tries to tell you when you are near the limit of a district or when the road network is getting too far away from the district building itself. However, these signs are connected to the road and only expand when you extend your roads to a certain length. This creates situations where you try to build somewhere and only found out later that it's out of your district's range because only now the road is extended far enough to show you the actual limit. So overall, these signs are very vague, especially for new players, though even after 40 hours I am still at guessing the actual range of any district I build. The solution of course would be very simple. Just like with other range buildings in the game, when you place them or click on them, they show predetermined full range rather than vaguely hint at it through coloring on the roads. Getting a better and more clear idea of what the limits are of your districts would make life easier and be a big help for when you're planning out your district or wanting to expand. Another great improvement would be that you're able to browse through the stats of all your districts easier. The resource bar at the top of the screen shows the total amount of resources collected by all your districts. Now, when you select a district building of a specific district, the stats in the resource bar changes to only show this district's stats. Knowing these stats is very helpful to know if your district has a problem or is running out of a certain resource. However, when you deselect this building, the stats change back to the overall stats automatically. There is an option to browse through every district, but there's no way to lock these stats in the top bar. While you are working in a specific district, it would be good to know how much resources you got to your disposal. But the only way you can go about this right now is by stop doing what you're doing and search and select the specific building in your district. Which is kind of annoying to do, and while there are these arrows on the right side of the screen to automatically warp to every district building, it's not the most convenient way to go about this. It would definitely be more convenient and nicer to be able to see all the stats from all my districts in a menu. From there you can even create graphs to see how much gain or loss there has been over a certain amount of time or something like that. But it doesn't need to be so detailed. It would already make a big difference and make life much easier if the resource bar at the top of the screen would change to the resources of each district when your mouse hovers over them. Or even better, have that exact same function but in a second resource bar on the top of your screen so you can quickly compare the overall resources with specific districts. However, the biggest problem I discovered in this game is its priority system. There is one in the game, but it does not affect buildings, only hauling jobs. And while it seems like a small problem, the lack of being able to set priority on certain buildings almost cost me 2 whole playthroughs. In my second and third playthrough, I was just about to expand my city until suddenly my beaver started to die left and right because of a lack of water. Now, I quickly jumped in and see how that was possible, and turned out that in a short amount of time, my workforce crumbled by multiple deaths of old age. Which I kept in mind, and I made sure there were enough replacements for these beavers. However, the amount of lost beavers was higher than I expected, though there were still enough to replace the workers at the key buildings. Yet the replacements went for, in my opinion, unimportant jobs instead, hereby basically assassinating the stable district I had created. The game did not really warn me that this was happening, which is not a must. I don't expect the game to mention every single thing that happens in my city. But once I found out the problem, I couldn't solve it either. I couldn't force one of my beavers to take a job at the water pump. Instead, I had to disable the buildings manually at random until somebody took the right job. This was a very annoying hassle to take care of, and even in later playthroughs, the problem kept returning that I couldn't prioritize buildings. Now, this issue is mostly avoidable once you know it can happen by basically having an amount of beavers unemployed all the time. But if you don't know this can happen and have to discover this by yourself, it can be frustrating to handle it. But what made this problem so annoying was that Timberborn has a priority system already, but just not one for buildings. And if survival is the goal, then these beavers should either know that a job at the water pump is more important than sawing planks, or I should at least be able to tell them that certain jobs are more important than others. Still, the overall experience with Timberborn is great and is really solid, especially considering this game is an early access game. It's a really big surprise. The game stays simple yet manages to keep things interesting with the way you play with the water. Personally, I wouldn't mind if the game would offer me some more long-term goals, as once you figure the game out and set up a stable city, your experience will slowly bleed till death. There are expensive structures you can build which you could set as long-term targets, but they are more of a grind than anything else. On top of that, I think the most fun in Timberborn can be found in the early game and playing on different maps constantly. So I didn't mind in the end to give up on cities that I built just to start over again. It would be cool to see more factions being added in the near future. So far the two that are present in the game are good, but of course more of them with the same impact would be great. The priority system on buildings would also be welcomed, as it would avoid some frustrations. But other than that, the game is great. Really curious to see where they will take this game over time. Maybe expand in more threats, maybe a campaign, scenarios or challenges. I would like to see more buildings that would fulfill the current needs, but just in a different way. This would also spice up the options in buildings and give you more options to personalize and design your cities. On Timberborn's Steam community page, some people have been posting some really interesting ideas as well, but how much the creators will take from these ideas has yet to be seen. Though it's good to see that the community is actively thinking alongside the developers. Though one little side note as well, just a little one. Now that I think about it, Timberborn has one more downside for me personally. I am definitely not a patriot, but while playing this game, the true Dutchman in me awoke, as fighting and controlling water is just in my blood. And I gotta say, Timberborn's challenges can be beat by simply following the Dutch way. It all begins with the factions right at the start. One faction has windmills, which makes them basically Dutch already. And while they have windmills, they also focus on farming, so yeah, that is the faction to play, as they basically follow the Dutch way by default. But to give some examples, if you're having problems finding space for those windmills, easy solution. Do it like the Dutch and build them above a body of water. Having a small water problem? Piece of cake. Just build a defensive barrier or construct that costs ridiculous, irresponsible amount of resources and only use this barrier or construct once or twice in your lifetime. But if you are going Dutch in Timberborn, keep one thing in mind. To really win the fight against water, you must put it above everything else. Literally. If the water level is not at least 1 meter above your city, then you are doing something wrong. But all jokes aside, Timberborn is great. It's a lot of fun and really relaxing. I highly recommend buying it if you are interested by the things you saw and heard of the game before or in this video. The price sits at $20.99, which is a steal, as the experience you get from this game is just really good.